ladies and gentlemen, Candice Fortman.
It is Monday, March 30th, 2008. 7 a.m., I am 27 years old. I was awakened by a call from my mother. Now, I got up for work at 7:30 a.m., so she was interrupting possibly the best 30 minutes of sleep I was gonna get for that night. When she calls, she tells me, "Candice, I need you to call an ambulance." She had been sick the week before with the flu, but an ambulance felt like a bit of a stretch to me. And sleepily, I say to her, "An ambulance? I can't just drive you to the hospital." We lived about 10 minutes from Henry Ford Hospital. She goes into her, "Stop asking me questions and do what I asked you to do" voice. A voice I was very familiar with, and a voice I always obeyed. I call the ambulance, I grab some clothes, and I rush next door. My mom had bought the house next door to my grandparents' house where I lived to use as an office. She was a tax preparer. So this time of year, she all but lived in that house. When I get into the house, I see that she's laying on the couch and she is visibly ill. I walk over to her, and sitting next to her is a trash can, and that trash can is full of Kleenex, very bloody Kleenex. I start to panic. I help her get dressed, get her shoes on, grab her wallet, and then I go into the bathroom, and when I get to the bathroom, I see a similar scene from what I saw in the living room, except for in the toilet, blood. I really start to panic, and in my head, I'm thinking, what the hell is going on? So the ambulance arrives quickly, and she tells me to grab my grandmother and to come separately. On the way to the hospital, that 10-minute drive I talked about all of a sudden felt like 10,000 years. And in my head, I'm thinking, what kind of flu makes a person this sick? This is about the time where the news started blowing up whatever the latest flu craze was every year. So I didn't know if we were dealing with like pig flu or bird flu or monkey flu or whatever it was. I just knew that it was bad and I was worried, right? So we get to the hospital, and I find out where my mother is. And right before I get to where she is, a doctor walks up to me and he points at me, and he points to the area where my mom is, and he says, "Are you her daughter?" And I say yes. And he looks at me, and in this very dry voice, he says to me, "So how long has your mother been an alcoholic?" And kind of taken aback, here was this stranger that sort of had looked at me and went inside my soul and saw my deepest secret. He saw the thing, he asked the question that no one is ever supposed to ask me. So I look back at him and say, "What are you talking about?" Clearly hiding from the truth. He then says, "Well, she's clearly jaundiced and her liver function is low." This doctor, who had the bedside manner of, say, Satan if he was the midwife during the birth of Jesus, it's an accurate description, was going to finally, though, allow me to live inside my reality and face facts. I walk over to the area where my mother is, and before she even said anything, I knew that she knew that I knew. She grabbed my hand, and in the most vulnerable moment that we have ever shared, she looked at me and she said, "I am so sorry. It is going to get better. I am going to be better." You have to understand that this was the mother who had inspired myself at 10 years old to be able to go into intercessory prayer. My grandmother had given me the gift that many of our grandmothers gave us. She taught me how to pray. I'd be sitting in my bedroom, Barbie PJs on, pigtails, holding my favorite orange stuffed animal, praying and crying and pleading to God, "Jesus, please make my mommy better. And if you can't make her better, make me better. Make me so I don't make her have to drink." The mom that I saw in that hospital room that day was the mother I loved most. The one with the big personality, the one who showed incredible strength, the one whose major concern in life was my happiness. My mother was a business owner, a community leader and activist, the life of any room she ever walked into, the loudest snapper I have ever met in my entire life, a lover of good food, good music, and good times. My grandparents' house was sort of like the epicenter of our family. There were times when we all lived in that house, my two aunts, my mother, myself, And around the table is where we would go to tell stories, you know? So, like, for instance, the story my aunt told me once, my youngest aunt, that they had gone out, her and my mother were going out, and they were going to Trapper's Alley, for those of you who are new to this whole thing, that's Greek Town Casino. And so they're going out, and my aunt is introducing my mother, you know, hey, this is my sister Peaches. Everyone called my mother Peaches. I did not know my mother's name was Wendy until I went to kindergarten. So, so, you know, hey, this is my sister Peaches. And a man overhears that and says, Peaches? Like Peaches and her Peaches? Now, a normal human being would have said, no, just Peaches, but not my mother. Yes, I am Peaches from Peaches and Her. And so they spend the rest of the night collecting autographs and getting free drinks and taking pictures, because if my mother walked into a room, she was going to own it, right? This is the same woman who decided that she was no longer going to work anymore. So let's go through the list of businesses. There was the catering company. There was the time when we sold fireworks out of the living room during 4th of July season. There was the pager and cell phone store that was set up in the basement of her house. Pagers and cell phone displays on this side, washing machine and bras hanging to dry on that side. It's a very normal thing. The bottom line was is that her hustle was incomparable. And her hustle had one drive, really, and that was me. Michigan Chronicle did an article about her one time, and she was quoted as saying, she had done a business incubator for women of color, which eventually became the reason why she opened Fortman's Tax and Accounting. And in the article, she's quoted as saying, I did this program to provide opportunities for my daughter, who is the love of my life. The same mother who would risk everything, would spend her last dollar to pay my Lutheran school tuition, was the mother who on one drunken Mother's Day when I was 12 years old, got mad at me because the card I had given her was smaller than the one I gave to my grandmother. She looked at me and said, you don't love me. You love her. You think she's your mother. And I look at her and I'm crying and I'm pleading with her, I do love you. I know you're my mother. I love you. We had moved to LA when I was about a year old. My mother was chasing love and youthful dreams, and what she found in its place was a love of drugs and alcohol. It was from a street corner in LA that she called home to talk to my grandparents, and she asked my grandfather asked what I was doing, and she said, oh, she's sitting here eating a syrup sandwich. And my grandparents, who had sent countless money to feed and shelter us, finally asked the question that needed to be asked. Can you send her home? Let us raise her. Let us take care of her. And that they did. I came home when I was about 2 or 3 years old, and my grandparents raised me. My mother eventually moved back when I was about 7, and she found work. She bought the house across the street from my grandparents' house, and I began living in the tale of two cities. When my mother moved back, she never moved away from alcohol. Let's move back to that Monday, March 30th of 2008. My mother tells me to take my grandmother back home, and so when we get there, I'm kind of sitting there thinking, my life might be about to change, right? So these prayers I've prayed are about to become true, and and I know it's gonna be a hard road, but things could get better from here. My stepfather comes home later that afternoon, and I hear him say, where's Candace? He walks over to me, I'm sitting in the kitchen, sitting on my grandparents' stairs, and he walks over to me and says, Candace, your mom's organs have started to shut down. And with a face full of tears, he tells me that my mother is dying. All of that hope I felt, all of that relief I felt that things might be getting better kind of just fell out of my body, and in its place became deep and penetrating despair. Tuesday, April 1st, 2008, 1:30 a.m. I can hear my grandmother walking up the stairs to my bedroom. She walks over and she sits on the bed and she puts her hand on my shoulder. And I was asleep, but not asleep. I was sitting there kind of waiting on this inevitable moment when my life was about to change for the worse. My grandmother says, Muff, she called me Muff, Muff, Peaches is gone, baby. My mother died of alcoholism 1 month shy of her 50th birthday. I all but climbed into my grandmother's lap and gave everything I had in tears. She had lost her child, and I had lost my mother. The next day, Tuesday, my friends started to come over, and here's the thing about dying on April 1st as a tax preparer. It is the end of tax season, so things got a little tricky for us. It is also April Fool's Day. So the reactions to her death when we called half of the city of Detroit, and by the way, we really did have to call half of the city of Detroit, were all over the place. The reactions were something like, "No, not Wendy. Take anybody else but Wendy," which I agreed with at that moment. And then there was the, "Candice, this is not a very funny prank." Well, I agree, which is why it isn't. And then there was the, "Oh, honey, I am so sorry to hear that. You know your mama loved you. When I would get my taxes done, that's all she talked about is how good her baby was doing. Now, I talked to your mom last week, and she said my check was going to be ready. Are you still going to be able to print that?" Every call was exhausting, and I was doing my very best to just keep it all together. At this point, I'm doing my very best. Everything is okay. I'm going to be fine. Everything's fine. As I'm inside dying. By that Wednesday, my friends had kind of taken over the business part of this transaction. And so I was able to just be at my grandparents' house greeting the hundreds of people who had called or stopped by to bring condolences. I spent an equal amount of time turning down the hundreds of offers for chicken and pound cake. I have decided since then that there's a DNA code in Black Americans that says someone has died, you should send chicken and pound cake. So later on that afternoon, my best friend says to me, "Candice, I need to talk to you." And so we go off in private, and she looks at me and she says, "I love you, right?" And at this point, she hadn't really left my side, so her love was really, not in question here. And I said, "Yeah, of course I know you love me." And she looked at me and she said, "Well, I'm saying this because I love you. You have to take a shower." At this point, I hadn't taken a shower since the Sunday before my mother had gone into the hospital. And sort of in this moment of complete honesty and being completely tired and completely exhausted from the mourning process, I looked at her and I told her, "I feel like if I get in the shower, my skin is going to fall off." I had been so used to swallowing pain, to bargaining pain away, to praying pain away, to crying pain into non-existence, that the simple act of washing felt like too much. But here was this person who loved me, who was saying to me, "Not only are you wearing the stench of the sorrow that you feel, but I had been wearing the pain of my mother's alcoholism the entire time." We go down into the basement, and I get in the shower. My skin is alive with the pain, but I survived it. I will never know what would have happened if my mother would have walked out of that hospital. I will never know if things would have been better. What I do know is that her life made me better. I am all that she is. Her life provided a roadmap for me. I often wonder if she spent too much time seeking happiness outside of herself. If she spent too much time worried about the happiness and the love of others and not the love of herself. All things that I've seen and recognized in my own life. What I do know is that she guides me every day. Wendy and Peaches guide me daily. She taught me how to turn right and which roads to avoid. Her life is the perfect direction for me. Thank you.